Hey everyone, and welcome back to our city, Lakewood. Today we're going to be taking care of a few things, starting with this train traffic jam. I'm not exactly sure why this happened. It was perfectly fine at the end of my last video, and even when I had planned out the next section of the city, but it's been a few months since then, and a couple DLCs have released that may have affected our train somehow. I've been racking my brain since I came back to try and figure out what's going on, and it turns out the solution is pretty simple. We're also going to be unlocking the observatory and Mall of Moderation while our trains are being fixed. Now obviously the train lines I have in this area aren't the most optimized, but they were running much better than this at the end of last episode. I really have no idea why all of a sudden my trains seem to be running this way. I even went into my planning save that I had done in preparation for this episode, and if I let that run for a bit, the trains seem to end up like this as well. I have a feeling it has something to do with the introduction of the new DLCs since I filmed my last episode. But honestly, I have no idea. That's just complete speculation at this point. I tried a whole bunch of different things to try and get this fixed. I ran different lines to the regional track. I ran different connections. I ran one-way exits and entrances to each of the cargo terminals and cargo areas, and nothing really seemed to work. So what I ended up doing was basically just a reset of our train lines. So to do that, I'm going to turn off all of the cargo harbors, all of the cargo train terminals, our cargo airport hub, and just let the trains kind of despawn and get out of the city, let the tracks clear, and then go back and turn everything back on. And that seems to fix it. I mean, it's obviously still not perfect, but nothing really bogs down quite to the extent that it is right now. It has a little hiccup here and there as two trains are approaching the same track, but that is to be expected, and it runs relatively smoothly for the most part. So just turning everything off for now, and while we're unlocking the Mall of Moderation and the observatory, we'll just kind of let the trains reset, and then partway through the episode we'll turn everything back on, and then at the end we'll take a look at our trains and see how everything's running. Now, unfortunately for us, and well, mostly unfortunately for Lakewood, in order to unlock the Mall of Moderation and the observatory, it's not going to be real great for our city. The Mall of Moderation is a level 2 unique building and requires an average garbage piling per building at least 25. The observatory is a level 4 unique building and requires 1,000 abandoned buildings in the city. Both of those should be relatively easy to achieve. It's going to be the recovery after that that's going to take a little bit of time. To get our garbage piled up, we're going to go into our budget menu, and then we're going to just reduce the budget of our garbage to as low as it'll go, which is 50%. I'm going to let the game run for a little while and see how that goes. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get to 25 average garbage pilings, but if not, we'll just have to go through and either turn off some of our waste processing complexes or turn off some of our waste transfer facilities. Just kind of have to wait and see how it goes. That really wasn't too bad. It only took about 15 minutes. Obviously, it would have been quicker if I turned the waste processing complexes and the waste transfer facilities off at the very beginning. But all I really did was set everything up and walk away from the computer as it was recording. So it doesn't get much easier than that. If we zoom in, we can see that just about every building is having some issue with garbage. Even starting to see some sick citizens here and there. So overall, not real great for Lakewood at the moment, but we do now have a Mall of Moderation, so worth it in the end, I suppose. We can also check out our observatory. We can see that we now have 7 abandoned buildings in the city. So what's that, 0.7%? So slowly but slowly, we're making progress on unlocking the observatory. However, I'm not going to be using garbage as a means to get abandoned buildings. I think recovery from having too much garbage, it's going to take too much time. Obviously, we have to get this garbage collected in order to recover from that. So I don't want to have to deal with that. Instead, we're going to be messing around with taxes to get our abandoned buildings. So I'm going to turn the garbage collection back up and actually increase it to 125% and try and get back down to relatively normal levels before we start trying to get our observatory officially unlocked. We're going to start by increasing the taxes for the low density neighborhoods first. I'm hoping that we're going to have 1,000 buildings in here and not have to do much with the high density neighborhoods. These high density neighborhoods, I think they're going to be a little bit more difficult to rebuild because I have lots of buildings marked as historical. A historical building, once it's abandoned, has to be manually deleted, and then I have to remark each new building as historical once it starts to rebuild. So I'm hoping to not have to do that. Because with these low density neighborhoods, as far as I can remember, I've pretty much just let them kind of build as they are. So for recovery, I'm hoping to just reduce the taxes back down to normal and have these neighborhoods just kind of rebuild by themselves. So in the economy panel, we're going to increase the taxes for our low density neighborhood up to 29%. That's going to help us a little bit too, because we're going to be losing money for quite some time. So having a 29% tax rate, even for just a few minutes, will hopefully help build up our money. We've already got lots, so I don't think that'll be an issue, but more money never hurts. I'm going to try and do this in real time because I don't think it's going to take too long for people to start complaining about having a high tax rate. But while this is going on, oh, there you go, you can see some of the icons are starting to pop up. But anyway, while this is going on, this is going to be a perfect time for us to go back through and turn all of our cargo trains back on. So we'll start up here at the cargo harbor and just work our way around. I think that is all of them. So we'll just leave those to get trains coming back to them. And then there we go. Just in time for lots of these red icons to start popping up. You can see everybody's complaining. Nobody likes high taxes. Check out our progress. We now have 13 abandoned buildings. So we'll just sit here and wait and see how it goes. We held steady around 13 abandoned buildings for quite some time, but then I think everybody got fed up with the high tax rates around the same time, so we started seeing a pretty big spikes in abandoned buildings, and once that started happening, it really didn't take very long at all for us to get up to 1,000. But I did have a little surprise at the end there, having to maintain 1,000 abandoned buildings for 5 weeks. I didn't know that was going to be a requirement, so the tax rates stayed high for those 5 weeks. Likely at this point, we have more than 1,000 abandoned buildings. You can see that there's still a few people hanging on. There's a couple of these high tax rate complaint icons kind of sprinkled throughout the areas. So there are still a few people at least living in these low density neighborhoods. But we're gonna hopefully recover from this pretty quick. And in order to do that, I'm just gonna go back into the economy panel and I'm gonna reduce the taxes back down to the lowest amount they'll go. Also gonna go into the policies, the city policies taxation tab, and I'm gonna provide a tax relief for low density residential. I don't really know if that's gonna apply to this very well because it's already as low as it'll go, but we'll see. I'm hoping that will provide some incentive for people to move back into the city. You can see that we have zero demand for residential, and honestly, we didn't lose that many people. We had about 100,000 at the beginning of this, and now we're down to only 80,000. So that kind of gives you an idea the difference between the high density residential versus the low density residential. We have about 4 times the amount of people living in the small high density area above here than the amount of people living in the low density area down below. So I'm going to resume the game with the lower tax rates, and then in the background, I'm hoping that the city will start to recover eventually while we put the observatory in the city. I think the best spot for our observatory is going to be up here on top of the mountain beside Meadows Park. Just ignore the giant patch of scorched earth where we just had a forest fire. But other than that, I think it'll be good because it's kind of up out of the way. I don't want to put it in with the houses down below. I think the light pollution from the houses, once they actually get populated again, would affect some views of the night sky. And then in the high density area here, obviously the tall buildings aren't very good to have observatories close to them. So up here on top of the mountain, I think is going to be the best spot, as I was saying. And to get here, it's going to be relatively easy. We're going to put a road just beside Meadows Park. It's going to run parallel to the edge of the city and just kind of wind its way up to the top of the mountain here. I'm going to stick to a dirt road. I don't think dirt roads have any street lights on them, so that'll kind of also reduce the amount of light coming up to our observatory. And yeah, we'll use the landscape tool here also to make sure we get a nice road up towards the observatory. I don't want to get too close to the camping spots here either. I think that would be kind of unfortunate to have a road right beside them. Like so. We'll probably go through here at the end and delete some of this foliage that we had originally put down for Meadows Park. But we'll do that at the end because I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We'll put the road up to the observatory first and then do some landscaping afterwards, rather than trying to landscape a path that we have to try and stick to. As many of you know, putting buildings or roads on sloped terrain, it tends to not go very well. The foundations of those roads and buildings, they need to be perfectly flat for the most part. So it'll kind of screw up your sloped terrain a little bit. So I think doing landscaping afterwards kind of makes most sense. But we can look at the terrain that we've already have available to us, and I notice that there's a little bit of a ridge that runs right along here where my cursor is right now. So I think it'd be kind of cool to have our road kind of follow that, and then curve down to the right here, and then back around to the road segment that we've already got at the bottom. As for the observatory itself, it's going to go into this kind of large open area right here. I think maybe we'll do actually a little bit of landscaping ahead of time and just flatten this area out. It's going to make it much easier for us to put our observatory right here. So that should be plenty of room for us to do that. And then we'll get going on the dirt road and do a little bit of landscaping. I think that looks relatively decent. A little bit steep along the part right here, but we are going up a mountain after all, so it's to be expected to be a little bit steep. The terrain didn't get messed up too bad. A little bit right here. I think we're gonna maybe do a little bit of landscaping on this section right here. We're gonna switch to the slope terrain tool and then just make a little bit of a smoother transition from ground level up to this road segment right here. I think that's a little bit better. And we'll go through and we'll also use the soften terrain tool just to soften things up around the edges. All right, our road's looking really good, so we might as well put in our observatory. I'd like to have it at the end here, but I don't want to have it parallel to the road. So we'll see where it can fit. I want to try and have it on the curved bit. And I want to have it facing the city rather than facing off into nothing. So we'll have it, looks like right about here is going to be the spot. And that's looking pretty cool. I like how it's overlooking the city. And even when you're down in the city here like this, you can see it on the mountaintop in the distance. That's looking pretty cool. All right, as for utilities, you can see it's complaining about not enough electricity. I did put the water pipes in ahead of time just off camera, so those are already in there. And for our electricity, we kind of have a couple options for us. Thinking about putting in some power lines, we could run some from over here near where the gondola is, so we do have some electricity available to us. But if we were to do that, we would have to run these power lines through the campground. And I don't really want to do that. I don't think that would be very good for Meadows. So the other option would be from the other side over here. And we'd have to cross over this road and the train tracks and then try and figure out a way up the side of the mountain. So instead of that, what I think a good option for us is going to be putting in a wind turbine. So our observatory at the top of the mountain here is going to have its own independent power supply rather than being connected to the same grid as the city. Now, just like having the observatory down in the high density residential area, I don't want to put the wind turbine right beside the observatory. That would connect us to electricity right away, obviously, but I think if this was a real observatory, the top bit of it could rotate around in a circle, and having our wind turbine right here would kind of block this whole part of the sky from our observatory. So instead of having it right beside the observatory, what we're going to do instead, so we're going to move it just down the mountain a little bit, not too far away from where our Observation decks and observation towers here are from Meadows Park. But once we have it down the slope there a little bit like that, from our observatory, that's pretty much close to the horizon. So should be well out of the way from any sight lines towards the sky. And then we can run some power lines up from there instead of from the main power grid of the city. So just like that, that should be more than enough power for our observatory, and we have all of our utilities hooked up. So that should be good to go for that. And the top of the mountain here, to me at least anyway, it's looking pretty bare. So what I think we should also do is put in some decorations, put in a whole bunch of trees up at the top, maybe some rocks, maybe some meadows, maybe blend it in with Meadows Park somehow, and just kind of finish off this area so it all kind of fits together. We're going to fast forward because I didn't think there was much point in doing yet another time lapse of me just planting some trees. So off camera, what I did was I removed the vegetation that was overlapping the dirt road going towards the observatory. And then I planted a bunch of trees on the top here. There's a small meadow that runs in between the wind turbine on the right. It goes underneath the power lines and then around the observatory on the end here. So I'm really liking how it turned out. I think it blends really good with Meadows Park. Let me know down below in the comments what you think. If you like the observatory where it is, if you like how it all blends together, positive or negative feedback, everything is appreciated. Let me know down below. Now, as for the city itself, I let the game run for a little while. It's been about 5 years, I think, since we unlocked the observatory and had all of the abandoned buildings. It actually took a little bit longer than I thought it was going to recover from what we had done. It kind of hung for quite a long time with a lot of abandoned buildings. We were still getting an influx of people. We're actually back up to about where we were when we started the video. But then all of a sudden there was a whole bunch of people that started moving in. We got demand for residential housing, and everything kind of just filled out. Other than there was a few historical buildings here and there. So I went through and manually deleted those and let them repopulate and mark them back again as historical. We're going to take a quick look at the train network before we end the episode. It's pretty much back to normal, or at least kind of how I remember it being at the end of the last episode. I'm not seeing any huge traffic jams on the train network anymore. There's a little hiccup every once in a while, maybe when two trains are trying to go to the same cargo terminal, or they're meeting at a junction of the train tracks here. But that is to be expected, given the amount of cargo trains that we're having in the city and the tracks that we have. It's not going to be perfect, obviously. So I'm really happy how that turned out. I still have really no idea why it was the way it was. Given that I didn't do anything in between the end of last episode and the beginning of this episode. So I think it's a background change in one of the DLCs that I have honestly no idea what it is. So we're pretty much back to how we ended the last episode, save for having the observatory on the right hand side here now. So we're getting ready to expand our industrial area. I think this was the original plan for this episode. I probably talked about it at the end of the last episode. So this area here is the next project for the next episode. And so that's going to also mean additions to our cargo train network and changes to the industrial area over here, because this was always temporary. It's not really suited for the roundabout that we have right here. So next episode, again, kind of just polishing off the areas and getting ready to finalize the city. As always, thank you all very much for watching the video. Let me know what you thought of it down below with a like, dislike, and or comment, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already for some more City Skylines content in the future, and I'll see everyone in the next episode.